Welcome to HCAT TV, How Does Your Garden Grow? We're here today at Weston Nurseries in Hopkinton with John Moretti for his Spring Lawn Care Seminar. Let's get started.
I should introduce myself. My name is John Moretti. I've worked in the garden center for quite a while. I used to work for a lawn company down in Maryland. So once you've done something around here, you become the expert. And so ever since then, I've been doing lawn seminars. And I find that they're a lot of fun. And I find that the audiences, the people who attend, come here with a purpose. And they usually get something out of it. So if you're not getting anything out of it, please raise your hand and pin me to the wall so we can get to the root of why you came here today. And I do have a lot of product out here. I'm not here specifically to push product, although product does solve problems. I'm going to break this down into a couple of sections, hopefully. The way these things usually work is I speak for about 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden the questions come in, and then we're off on a tangent. If you have a very specific question to your own yard about some problem area, we might better handle that after the conversation, because those can sometimes get very complicated. But don't be afraid to ask questions as we go along. So I'm going to start with what I call my top 10 list, top 10 spring lawn care mistakes. So we'll deal with that. Then I want to go through a little spring agenda, what you should be doing now. I did one of these back in March, about 4 weeks ago, and there's about this much snow on the ground. So that one had a little different focus, because we weren't really looking at anything. I brought a few props with me. We'll talk a little bit of, this is some Weston grass. I brought it in mostly to make everybody feel better about their own lawn, because at this point of the season, a lot of people give up on lawns. They walk outside after the winter. There's debris, there's dead spots, there's mold tracings, and I try to encourage people to stick with it, because your lawn will never look worse than it does right now. This is the low point. So if you have some grass and you have something to work with, then we can work with it. We can get something done. So we'll talk a little about what you should be doing now, and then a little quick thing on seeding guidelines, because people get a lot of questions about. I've been seeding the same spot for 25 years. It comes up and then it fails, and So what are we doing wrong when we seed? And then if we have time, or if anyone's interested, I'll talk a little bit about the difference between a synthetic program and an organic program. I get this. This is a very current topic. Everybody is, trying to transition. Even the major companies. The Jonathan Green is a good example. This is a company that for years sold a 4-step program, very similar to Scott's, and we latched on to Jonathan Green because we thought that it was a good product and it was easy for people to use. Had good directions. The calibrations were good, but they were also pushing, do this now, do this now, this 4-step thing, go out in the summer and fertilize, and do things that didn't always make agronomic sense, and people sometimes didn't understand why they were doing it. A couple of years back, they came up with this new, basically a PR program called the All-American Lawn. And the All-American Lawn recognizes that there are certain things we should be doing, not only to feeding and solving problems on the surface of the grass up here, but also issues with why is the lawn poor? And a lot of that had to do with soil chemistry. And a lot of it had to do with the lack of microbial populations in soils. And so they really started to hone in on, let's put together a program that is more custom directed, that people can understand why they're doing it, and also to take out the parts of the program that people used to do by rote. And my biggest objection always was to the summer fertilization, which had an insecticide in it. That was step 3. If everybody remembers the famous step 3 programs. And people might not have insect issues, and B, July is not a good time to feed your lawn. So as soon as they acknowledged that that part of the program needed to be looked at again, people started to come around. So our idea here is to figure out what's going on the lawn, what we really should be doing, and not get too focused in or too locked into the 1, 2, 3, 4. And I will talk about the step programs, and they are helpful, but you have to know how to modify them for your own situation. Okay, that's a lot. So anybody have any questions before we start? Anyone who needs to leave, please get up and leave. The restroom is in the back, straight across the way. And we'll try to wrap it up maybe in an hour or so, if we can. So you can get on to your life before the bad weather gets here. It's a beautiful day today. You probably want to go over and buy some plants in the garden center. All right, top 10 spring lawn care mistakes. And I've made about 6 of them myself, so don't feel bad. First one, getting started too soon. So what does that mean, getting started too soon? There's a point in the spring, and this varies depending on your lawn, where the lawn is not ready to have anything done on it. You know, people went out in February this year because the weather got nice. And they went out and the lawn was super saturated and everything was wet and, you know, branches down, and they started raking up and tramping all over the lawn. Most important thing in the spring is not to get out onto a lawn and try to do anything until the lawn is ready to receive foot traffic, and particularly equipment. You don't want to be taking heavy lawn tractors or things onto soil that is wet and gives you that sort of squishy feel. Now, most people are beyond that, but you know, if you have a wooded lot or something, you may have these areas that are still moist. We don't want to be trafficking out on them and walking out on it. And also, the soil is cold, so a lot of things we want to do early, we can't do anyway. You know, when we start thinking about pre-emergent crabgrass control and this kind of thing. So hold off until we get, I would say we're getting into prime time now. And then we're going to have this brief window where you want to get out and do everything, okay? So, but if your lawn, if you go out on the lawn and for any reason it feels like you're footprinting, you know, and that's where you walk across the lawn, you turn around and you can see where you came from. If you're leaving indentations in the lawn, you shouldn't be out walking on it because it destroys soil structure, causes compaction, actually can kill off rooting. Rooting stops. Rooting then wants to go horizontal rather than deep. So be careful you don't get started too soon. The second one is getting started too late, of course. And everything in lawn care, at least in the spring, is based on soil temperature. So when do we get started doing things? We get this question all the time. When do we put down pre-emergent? When should we start fertilizing? Soil temperature determines everything. So if you have an open lot with lots of sun, your soil is going to warm up a lot quicker. You know, it may be elevated, it may be a banking, or you know, these soil conditions where the winter sort of drains away and the soil warms up. So you can get those warm 50, 60 degree temperatures, may have them already. That's, otherwise, right now, soil temperatures are not at that point where we start worrying about what are the two things. One is crabgrass germination, which everybody, if you had crabgrass, you want to make sure that you're on top of that. And the second one is when can I start seeding? When will seed germinate? So how do we determine soil temperature? Well, just like anything else, there's a tool. There's a soil thermometer. Now, when soils hit 55 degrees, you can go out and seed. Now, you can seed before that, but you can't expect germination until soil hits 55. So you can actually walk around the yard and probe different parts of the yard and get an idea of soil temperature. My way of doing is if you go online, there's an organization called the National Corn Growers Association, which I found by accident. And they, every day, and I don't know how they do this, they must have minions all over the country, they publish a map that will show your temperate zone and what the average temperature in that area is. So you're all familiar with zone maps when you're buying plants, 5B, 5A. So it's the same thing. They run this temperature band through there. And the last time I looked, which was yesterday morning, most temperatures in central Mass were still in the 40s. So they have a long way to go to warm up to the point where, certainly where crabgrass would germinate, but also for seeding. Now, can we put seed down before the optimal temperature hits? Of course. And in many cases, you want to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I get into seeding. Okay? So you can do the soil temperature using this, or go on that website. What most people do, if they're experienced with their lawn, is that they wait for that first sign that the lawn is greening up. And some people are seeing that already in open, sunny areas where the lawn was ugly, ugly last week, a little better this. Oh, look at this. There's life in that lawn. That gives you an idea that the soil temperatures are pushing up to the point where activity is going to begin, which means growth of the existing grass, but unfortunately also the eventual germination of things we don't want coming up in the lawn, which would be the annual grasses and some of the broadleaf weeds. So is everybody familiar with that concept of greening up? Everybody, probably, I mean, if you have a lawn, you've seen that. You know, one day you come home one night and you go, gee, somebody must have done something to the lawn. It looks a heck of a lot better than it did last week. That's a natural process that will occur in the spring, even if you do nothing. But our job is to make sure that greening up thing is pushed to its maximum so that you can get the best results of that natural tendency of things to want to come out of dormancy. So there's a few things that we would do. All right, number 3 mistake, I call this one flying blind, and a lot of us do this. This is where we don't take the time to do the kind of analysis that you need to do out on your lawn, particularly this time of year, which includes soil testing. Particularly if you have a chronically bad lawn, one of the most important things we can do is to get a pH test done, or to do one ourselves. There's a couple of ways these can. There's the famous meter that you can test it. This is old school but very effective. The old litmus test where you match the color up to the pH. And people always say, well, how accurate could that be? Well, you don't have to be that accurate. We need to know within 1 to 2/10 of a point. So there's a color gradation here, and we're not in the lab here. We're just trying to get a good baseline of what that pH is on our lawn. There's also professional testing where you can send out to a service. UMass still does testing through its agronomy department. You can go online, and you can find there's a thing you have to fill out, and they tell you how to take the sample and how to send it in. The easiest thing, if you're local, is to fill up a coffee can worth of soil and truck it into our garden center, and we do soil testing for free. So, and we have a fairly sophisticated tool to do that with. It's more than adequate for what you want to do.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you soil test, do you just go to one section because sections are bad?
Right, yeah, that's an excellent question. We always want to get a composite of soil when we're doing a soil test. Now, you may have a vegetable garden, and then you have a lawn area, and then you have beds. You want to keep those tests separate. But if you're doing a lawn sampling, and you go out in your front yard, and the lawn, well, there's something wrong here. I'm doing everything right, and I'm not getting any improvement in the lawn. You'd want to take these soil samples a few inches down in the root zone, so kind of flip the turf back. Take at least 3 or 4 areas and combine that soil. They also recommend that you don't handle it with your hands, because that can affect the pH. And if you're going to test it yourself, to make sure that you use distilled water. You don't want to use, a lot of people's water is very alkaline, and that throws off the test. So you think you're better than you are. But it's pretty easy. If you use if this is a dry test with just a wand, I would take a number of samples. If you get a reading on a pH test that seems odd, let's say you've been doing, you have a decent lawn, you've been liming a lot, and your pH comes out at 3.2, which is, of course, down on that acidic end of the soil. Take another test, because sometimes you get false readings. It was a guy who brought in a soil test, and his pH was like 7.5 or 7.6, which is unheard of in New England, of course, because we have naturally acidic soils. And it turned out this was the point where when he used to lime, every time he turned around, he'd leave the thing open. So basically, he had an alkaline subset in the lawn, and that was always where he took a soil sample. So it turned out his pH was right where it should be. And what are we looking for? The pH, typically, we're looking at the 6.5 pH, 6 to 6.5 for most turf grasses in New England. 6.5. All right, so it's soil testing, soil structure, and an assessment of the condition of the lawn. Now, what does that mean? This is, as I mentioned, so I brought in this little sample. This is a little area from out front in our lawn. And lots of times, when we assess a lawn in the spring, it gives us a very good indication of how the season is going to go. And what are we basing that on? Primarily 2 things. One is rooting depth. Let me pick up this nice big hunk of. This gave me a nice little fight when I pulled it out of the ground. So what we want to discover is, and you don't need a piece this big. People always ask, the best thing to do is usually to take one of those bulb planters, and sometimes you can buy them where you stand on them. Those are excellent for this. And you cut out a cup, just a little core of soil, just the way you would if you were on a golf course and they cut the green and you pull out this thing that's a little cylinder of soil, thatchy material, and then grass on the top. How do you go about dethatching? Now, when you only have a little bit of thatch, there's actually a natural process where if you have good, healthy microbial populations in the soil, they actually consume the thatch material and break it down into what essentially looks like compost, which, in other words, adding organic matter to the soil. That's a healthy lawn. So you're producing some thatch every year. They're eating the thatch, if you want to picture it like that. These microscopic microbes are actually decomposing this, and you have a nice, healthy balance. Now, sometimes when you use lots of pesticides, lots of fertilizer, if you irrigate too frequently, too much watering. In other words, you're pushing the lawn. You keep it looking like Ireland right through July and August. Water, water, water. That tends to build a lot of top growth and rhizome growth. And what that does is it contributes to thatch buildup. So something this thick, there is no way you're going to get that thatch out unless you do something mechanical. You can't. Now there are things you can put on there that decompose the thatch from the top. It's like, that you're adding microbes to, so you have like a microbe sandwich. You're trying to deal with it that way. But when you have over an inch of thatch, you're going to have to get into either raking it out or renting a piece of equipment like a dethatcher, which is also called a vertical mower, if you picture it. And that's a good description of what it does. Rather than the blades spinning this way and cutting your grass, the blades are positioned this way. They're not this big, but and they're adjustable up and down. So depending on how deep we want this to go into my thatch layer and start ripping that stuff out. Their blades are set, maybe 3/4 of an inch apart, and they can swing back and forth. If you hit a rock, so it's actually a fairly easy piece of equipment for a homeowner to use to get the thatch out of the lawn. It takes a lot of effort to get the thatch out. That's the flip side of it, because if we dethatched a 5,000 square foot lawn that had this much thatch in it, we'd have probably 4 truckloads of hay. If you've ever seen a guy's lawn after he's done it, it's like, it's unbelievable that was in there. But that's how compressed it is. So to answer your question, if you're doing it yourself at home, the best thing to do is don't put the blades down too deep in the beginning. I've seen people where it'll be easy if I put it all the way down to the bottom, and they wind up rototilling their lawn. This is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to rototill the thatch only. So some of it is, the guy who rents you the piece of equipment will probably give you a good sense of, how deep you want to set those blades. But, it's like anything else. You don't want to set your mower blade too low and start mowing the lawn. Get a sense of what it's doing and what it's pulling out. Now, if it's not pulling anything out, then you don't have it in deep enough. So usually when you pick it up, it's at the depth that the last guy did it. And if it worked for him, it'll probably work for you. But just be careful. Take it out in the back where it doesn't matter and try it out before you run it across your nice brand new front lawn. And leave a Y. Because if you dethatch too deep, if you rototill the lawn, it's extremely stressful, and it can recover from that. You also want to be careful when you do this dethatching. There are 2 periods during the year when you want to dethatch. One is in the spring, once the ground is dried up enough so it can put a heavy piece of equipment on it. We want to do that up until probably maybe the first week in June. You might push it to the second week of June, but you don't want to be doing any dethatching right in advance of hot weather. And we've had some funny years where it gets hot in the first week of June. Summer just comes. So, and the reason for that, of course, is that these are cool season grasses. And once we dethatch them, we get this great recovery period where it's almost stimulating. It's like somebody, raked your head or something, and your hair started growing again or something. It encourages it to break new growth and to start thickening up. But if we go immediately into dormancy because the temperatures get hot, you can't get any recovery time for this grass. So you want to be doing this April, May is the best time, and then you can come back in late summer, and in September is a good time to dethatch. But don't dethatch on Thanksgiving. And it's the same thing. If you beat the lawn up at Thanksgiving and then the lawn goes into dormancy, you'll have other issues. So a couple of periods there where it's great. Sometimes you see people dethatching in the middle of the summer. And sometimes it's guys who have a little attachment that fits on their lawn tractor. What they're doing when they're riding around with those little things kind of bouncing around is nothing. So it's safe. If your neighbor is dethatching in June using a lawn tractor, he's not dethatching. He's raking. He's sort of combing it a little bit. But dethatching is kind of a brutal process that the lawn, and it's what the lawn needs when it has thatch like that. But did I answer the question? Yeah, okay. All right. So thatch, soil structure, we've done that. The other one, this is one of my favorites. The other flying blind category is lack of basic data. And I always tell the story of my 2-bag guy who's been coming to this nursery for 30 years. Comes in every spring to buy lawn stuff, and set me up what I need. And I said, well, how big is the lawn? And his answer always is, I use 2 bags. Now I found out where he lived, and I saw his lawn, and it turned out he had 3/4 of an acre of lawn. But in his mind, he had made this computation somehow. I don't know, maybe he just put it in the spreader and ran around with it. you can't do anything in lawn care without the basic data, which is square footage. You have to know how big the lawn area is. You can't apply anything. You can't fertilize. You can't lime. You can't do weed control. You can, but the results sometimes are a little scary. You either get no response, which means you're throwing the money away, or you're going to the other end and you're stressing the lawn. So knowing, plus or minus a couple hundred square feet, it's not that exact, but you have to know the square footage of the lawn area, not your plot plan, including the house and this kind of thing. So, how do we do this? Pacing it off is the easiest way to do it. You might have a circle area, basic algebra, figuring out how many square feet you have, and then you can come down here and buy the appropriate amount of material. Also, when you put it in the spreader, you have to know, well, it says set it, 6 pounds per 1,000, and so you put 30 pounds, that should cover 5,000. Well, how big is 5,000? I don't know, let's just go. And they start wandering around the yard, spreading usually, and it's usually overdone. So, lawn care is expensive. The best way to get some control on it is to know exactly how much material you should be putting down. And that goes for seed, too. Seeding, people think seeding is Johnny Appleseed wandering around, throwing seed. A lot of people seed without using a spreader. They don't calibrate a spreader. They don't know how many pounds they're put down. They don't even know how big the bag of seed is. Where's my seed? This kind of thing. They just, I have a neighbor who does this. He does everything wrong on his lawn, so I'm not going to identify who he is. But his idea of preparing the lawn in the winter, it's always during football season, so I don't have time. He does it on a Sunday. He does it at halftime. And I look out the window, because he'll always be out there. He's wandering around trying to seed out of a bag with no soil preparation, just everything, he does everything wrong on the lawn. And it reflects it, And so he has a very negative attitude about lawns. So part of my mission in life is probably to get him back on the right track. But so you want to know the square footage. What am I trying to do? How big is the area that I'm working with? The other thing is to make sure that you know that your equipment, that your spreaders that you're using to apply this material are properly calibrated. That they're not, sometimes people say, well, I think I have 5,000 square feet, and I buy 5 bags of lime, and I try to set it at the right thing, and it never comes out right. Well, you look at the spreader, and it's all rusted out underneath, and the little apertures that are supposed to be this big are this. You have to know that you have equipment that is putting out the material at the right rate. And some of that is just intuitive. If you notice that, well, it said that this 5-pound bag of seed is going to cover 1,200 feet, and it only covers 400 square feet, even though what it says on the bag matches where you set the equipment isn't calibrated right. So you want to make sure that equipment, and how you do that is very complicated, and I'd be happy to go over it with anybody. There are ways that you can actually test the application rate of your material at home that's a little more scientific than just sort of getting an idea of, I have 5,000 feet, this is a 5,000 square foot bag, let's see if it covers it, kind of thing. So, but I'll skip that for now. And then the other thing that people don't take into account is trying to remember what happened last year, what happened the year before that, what happened, So when we have repeat visitors who are addressing the same area, the same problem, what we try to find out is, well, what was the chronology? Did you have crabgrass? Did this lawn look good until July? Is this little area over here always dead? Really, it's sort of a roadmap of your yard, and getting an idea of how did this get into the mess that it's in. And a lot of that is just remember, like, oh yeah, my husband went out and he did this beautiful seeding job, and the lawn looked great until the second week of June, and then things went bad. All right, so then we can take that back to, well, that's maybe when you might start seeing some leaf spotting disease, and a lot of these problems on lawns are very cyclical. They happen at the same time every year. You may have noticed it. It always happens at the same time. Always have this damage at the same time. So once we get a handle on when that is, some of that is just sort of mental record keeping, or actually writing it on a calendar when things started to become a problem. It makes it a lot easier to solve the problem if we know, when did the problem start? How long has the problem been going on? Maybe it's not a solvable problem, that kind of thing. All right, number 5, lawn care mistake. Ignoring the facts of life, which means that you're not getting real with your lawn. And a lot of people know this. They just intuitively know that their soil is lousy. Oh, I have bad soil, but give me what I need to make a good lawn. Or I know there's no organic matter in the soil. or I know it's always wet down there. It really kind of ties in with the previous one. And the biggest one of this is to recognize sometimes you have impossible site conditions. There are areas in lawns that shouldn't be lawns. There are areas in your yard that won't sustain a lawn. It doesn't matter what you do. You can have a professional come and do it, and that includes areas that are very shady, areas that are very wet, areas that have no soil. You basically areas where it's pure sand, maybe. All of these things, pretty much, unless those conditions are addressed, don't buy the product. Don't because you won't be successful trying to get that area to be successful as a lawn. Probably the biggest one is the shade problem, and we get that question a lot. People who have shady areas, can you grow a lawn in shade, in dark shade, under that big oak tree? The only person that can grow a lawn under there is somebody who has no children, no pets, and no visitors, which would mean that nobody walks on the lawn. And it's deceiving. You pick up the deep shade grass seed. I don't know if I have one over here, but they always have that picture of that beautiful glade of green with a tree over it. It's like, yeah, well, great, but as soon as you go out there and take a picnic on that or something, you're going to have problems because there's no recovery ability of turf. There is no shade turf, and there's no deep shade turf. I shouldn't say there's no shade turf, but there's no vigorous kind of shade turf is what I'm saying. So that might be an area where you might make a bed, you might put some ground cover, you might put some mold, whatever, but don't do a lawn there. Because then it distracts you from dealing with, well, over here I can do a lawn. This is my good area. Find out where you should have a lawn and find out where you shouldn't. And then once you put all your energy into that area, you're going to have a good lawn, rather than running back to the bad area all the time. All right, number 6 is, I call it overcompensating. And this is for people who don't want to spend the time learning what's really wrong with their lawn. And I call it the shotgun approach, which is you just throw product at problems. It might be this, it might be that, it might be, that very rarely works. And really the pinnacle of that are the people that over-apply everything. And you probably know some of them. If it says do 10 pounds per thousand on the fertilizer, I'm going to do 20 because I have a bad lawn. If it says use 3 pounds of seed, I'm going to use 20 because it never fills in. All of those are it cannot work unless you read the label, know what you're applying, and don't overdo it. The overdoing thing is a real problem, particularly when you get into herbicides and when you get into insecticides, because they're very caustic materials. And this is where we get into the problem with people burning their lawn, overstimulating. I always like to harp on the label of whatever it is, not even a pesticide, but even a fertilizer, getting that sense of, they have guys who have spent 20 years developing that label. The most important thing is reading the labels, reading the labels, or talk to somebody who has used the product so they can guide you in that. Don't just go blind on that. All right, 7 is failing to learn from the past and to anticipate problems. That goes back to knowing your lawn. In other words, knowing what this happens every year. Just acknowledge that it does. Now let's come up with something that'll take care of it. Big one in this area is usually grub problems that people don't address properly because they're putting the material down at the wrong time. They're using the wrong material at the wrong time. They're applying it when they don't need it. So we need to learn how do I know I have grubs, and how do I know when to apply the material? That's a big one. So can an amateur have as good a lawn as a professionally maintained lawn? And the answer is absolutely. And you don't have to quit your job for that to happen. But you do need knowledge. What do these guys have that you don't have, other than better equipment and nicer trucks? They know what they're doing. And whereas homeowners are relying on television to tell them, I mean, Scotts comes out, not to knock Scotts because we carry their product and it's a great product, but you'll turn on the television in February and they start the Scotts commercials. And this being a national brand, obviously, they're advertising down in Georgia. They're advertising, but this stuff sort of filters up into our area. So people go, oh, well, Scott said I should be out fertilizing. I should put my Preemergent down. So you're trying to do everything right, but you're doing it at the wrong time. So most important thing is just basic, getting that knowledge base together. So you can have a decent lawn if you're doing the advantage to doing it yourself. And I point to this all the time is that because I used to work for a lawn company, I might have 120 accounts that I'd have to service, which means that I know the exact day when crabgrass is going to germinate in this part of town, for instance. Well, I can only service 12 lawns. You might get it 2 weeks later. Whereas if I'm a homeowner, I know exactly when I should be putting pre-emergent. I can walk out and put it down. So there's that time lag when you get service from somebody who has to maintain not just your yard, but everybody's yard. Now, if you have a private gardener, you're doing good. That's the next step. Okay. All right. Failing to learn from the past. So that's, grubs, disease problems that you've had and you've ignored, those kinds of things. Weeds that come back every year, that kind of thing. All right, number 8, taking the easy way out. And I call this going natural. The natural lawn now, the organic approach is really big. There's some people that are taking this right off the cliff, which means I do nothing. And in fact, I encourage problems, weeds, and this kind of thing. You have to keep in mind that turf is a crop, and it's a very finicky crop. And if it isn't fertilized, if it isn't mown properly, if it isn't watered properly, if it isn't dethatched, you're not going to have a good lawn. Okay, so you can go natural, but I always think of, well, go out and look at the prairie out in Ohio, the rolling hills. That's what the lawn looks like, and if that's your expectation, you're all set. But if you want to have a sort of a monoculture lawn, which everybody loves, everybody wants that beautiful, dark, deep green, evenly mowed, pristine looking, that requires attention. And particularly the fertilization end of it, because people always say, well, grass lives, and grass, I don't ever fertilize over there. It's like grass needs, if you have a good quality lawn, you're going to need 3 pounds of nitrogen, maybe 2.5 pounds of nitrogen a year to keep that healthy, because it consumes nitrogen. That's, all that growth. Think of all of that shoot growth. How many times do you cut the lawn? In the spring, it's probably every 3rd day or something, right? Well, that's a lot of energy. So in order to keep that green look, and how do you get the green look? Well, the green look is it's shoot growth. If you're not producing growth, the lawn isn't going to be greened. That's where, when this stuff pushes up, oh, my lawn is greening up. That's shoot growth. So you need to fertilize to get decent shoot growth. Okay. Number 9, failing to maintain your equipment. This is my favorite one. And I brought this in because this is my neighbor's lawnmower. He has a Honda. It's one of those mulching mowers. It actually has 2 blades. One of them kind of lifts it, and one of them cuts it, and then it recuts it. He's owned the thing for 22 years, and he never took the blade off in the entire time that he owned the machine. This is the original blade that's been on there for 22 years, and he cuts the lawn, and he wonders why his lawn looks poor. We all know the problem of dull mower blades. So I want to make sure I got that one in first. Taking off your mower blade and sharpening up, you can't even find an edge to this anymore, but with a flat file, making sure that you've got an edge on this thing. Professional guys do this, if they're really good, they're going to be doing it a couple times a week. They'll be pulling off there. If they're cutting a lot of lawns, some of them do it every 10 hours. They'll take the blade off and sharpen it up, because when you have a nice clean cut, as you all know, you have a nice looking lawn. When you beat the lawn to death, which basically is what this, you have to, it's sort of knocking it down and thrashing it, you're going to get bad cuts, the lawn's going to lodge down, you're going to get bad color, you're going to get wounds that don't heal quickly on the grass blades, and the lawn will look second rate. So make sure you've pulled your blade off. If you haven't done it this spring yet, you should do it. The other thing you want to make sure is you've got a balance to the blade. There's some mowers actually have a little insert thing here, and you can put a pencil in there, and you want to make sure that your mower blade is balanced, because once you've sharpened it up, his is balanced because he's never touched it. But normally, if you start to sharpen it, you can get it out of whack. So what do? You get a little wobble in the lawn, so you don't get a nice clean cut. So pull the blade off. The other thing on equipment is that my lawnmower never starts in the spring. I always have to have some guy come out and fix it. Anybody know what's the number 1 reason why your lawnmower won't start in the spring when you pull it out of the garage? Plug. I'm sorry?
The plug?
It could be the plug. Yes, sir. Bingo! It's the bad gas. They figure gas goes bad usually in about 4 weeks, and if you get old gas, and that's untreated. I mean, there are things you can put in gas to prolong it, but if you just leave the gas particularly in a simple 4-stroke engine, or it might be a 2-stroke, but you tend to have problems with almost like a varnish forms in the gas, and it tends to gum everything up, and it also, the ignition point changes. So when you pull that little string and you have that feeble little spark trying to ignite something that doesn't want to be ignited, pulling on the thing all day. So if you didn't take the gas out in the fall, it'd probably be a good idea just to drain it out. You can put that gas into your car. I asked a mechanic that once. If you put small amounts of that, she told you not to do it, right? I can. You actually, yeah. Don't throw it in the, don't throw it in the woods or something. You'd want to, dispose of it properly. But you can burn it through your car. There's enough dilution in a 20-gallon tank, plus the fact that you've got an 8-cylinder engine. It isn't going to be affected by a little bit of bad gas. But and you also can get water in the gas, which prevents it from igniting. So change the gas. The spark plug is also a good one. Some people, you don't necessarily have to change it because you're not using this commercially. So there's probably nothing wrong with the plug. But when you pull it out, it'll be all black. And you may find that the gap is not correct now, so you want to re-gap it, which is a little simple tool. You just slide a little bar in there, and you can make sure that you're gapped properly. And then clean up the contact points where the spark jumps between those. And if you do all those things, put the new plug in. Then make sure that there aren't leaves in your air filter. Your air, there's a little protective, usually it's a sponge-like thing that covers your air intake. Sometimes you open that up and you'll find a mouse nest in there or something, but make sure that, all you really need, it's the simple, you need air, you need something that can ignite, and you need a spark. And if you have all three things together, the thing will start right up. But it's amazing. I hear that on Saturdays sometimes in your neighborhood. You hear, everybody pulling on these chains trying to start equipment that should have been winterized. That's a fall thing. So if you come in for the fall lecture, you'll get a little bit more of that. But maintaining that, and also checking your other equipment. Check the mower deck. Particularly if you have a ride-on mower. Lots of times, I don't know if you pull the deck off. Most people do in the fall. But if you don't, you might want to slide the deck out from underneath, turn it over, and clean it, because everybody's had this problem where you're trying to cut the grass and it's not coming out properly. There's an airflow thing that has to happen. And sometimes you'll see these things where there's literally, it looks like a nest under there. So clean out, go under the deck, clean that out, wash it off maybe. It's all kind of basic stuff. We don't think of this because, most lawn equipment is not high-value equipment. I'll just buy another one, that kind of thing. But, a good lawnmower, if you maintain it, could easily last 20 years. As long as you change the blades once in a while. or sharpen the blades. Any questions on, yes? That's what a lot of people do.
Let it go.
Yeah. Do your final mowing, and if there's a little bit left in there, burn it out. Yeah. If you sometimes people will drain the tank, but they leave the gas in the line, and so there's actually it's prepped through that tubing, and that can cause problems too. So burning it out, right? Getting it. So there really should be nothing in it. You ought to be able to just tip that thing upside down, and no gas. So. And if you have to leave the gas in it for some reason, if it's some big piece of equipment, then you want to make sure you use stabilizer in the gas and run that through. And also, once you add the stabilizer to the gas, run it so the stabilizer is in the system, runs through the system. Oh, and changing the oil. I almost forgot the most important one. Again, nobody ever changes the oil on it. Anybody ever change their oil on there? Oh, good for you. All right. Yeah, changing mowers, you figure out they only run 45 minutes. How bad could it be? After 2 years of not changing the oil, and when you actually take that oil out, if anyone's had that experience, you almost can't get it out of the machine. So you got to run it up real hot, and then it turns into gunk. And not that this is a terrible thing, but you're not getting an efficient cut. And you're wasting gas and all this kind of thing. And eventually you'll damage the engine just the way you would your car engine. So change the oil. That's another good fall thing to do. All right, and number 10, finally, the last top 10 spring care lawn mistake is setting unrealistic expectations, which the wife usually has for the husband. That's the way in my experience. But no, realistically, the biggest part of lawn care is getting a sense in your own mind, what am I willing to do, how much am I willing to spend, and how much time am I going to put into this thing, at what level of maintenance. And if you're a golfer and you've seen the golf course with a $10 million maintenance budget, and you want your lawn to look like that, that's different than the guy who wants, I want it green, I want it dense, I want to be able to go out and, walk through it, that kind of thing. So if your expectations are really high, you're going to have to be prepared to do a lot more, And sometimes it is unrealistic, even with professional care, that you're, it's, and people sometimes forget that there's always this, it's sort of a lag to everything we do. You can't go from a bad lawn to a good lawn in 1 year. You can't go from a good lawn to a super lawn in 1 year. And you can't go from a synthetic-based good lawn to an organic-based good lawn in the same year. So there's always this drop-off when we go to, because that's another question people, I went to an organic program in the lawn, gee, it just kind of went downhill. It's like, well, organic lawn care is a long climb. It's like going up a mountain. It's multiple years of, if you're getting into using corn gluten rather than a synthetic pre-emergent. If you're doing weed control with a product like Burnout rather than using a 2,4-D based thing. It's a different approach entirely. So a lot of it is you have to have patience, and then you have to set reasonable expectations, as I'm sure you all know. So, anybody have real high expectations for their lawn? Is there anybody? Come on, there's got to be somebody in here who's wondering. No, good. Yeah, I mean that's part of the good thing that's happened to lawns in the past half a dozen years is that people are getting a better handle on, I really don't have to push this lawn to the edge of the earth, which is what we do, which some lawn companies will do that. I worked for a company that did 6 applications a year. That's a lot of attention. That's a lot of fertilizer. These lawns would look, it looked like the Queen's Court. They were so beautiful. But they had a life expectancy because we were pushing them. And they would start developing things like thatch problems. And we'd be encouraging shallow rooting by pushing top. Everything we did because people wanted them green. This was in an area where the standards were extremely high. But we could almost chart the problem with pushing. If you push a lawn too hard, it actually has a life cycle. And it's usually 8 to 9 years. After about the 9th year, because of all of these problems that start to build up, the quality of the lawn starts to fall off. Unless you're doing the dethatching, unless you're doing the aerate. So once you push the lawn to one end, then the maintenance starts to pile up as well. You have to keep up with the mechanical stuff. So by lowering with the expectation of the lawn and getting on sort of a sane application rate, fertilizing a few times in the fall, maybe doing some pre-emergent in the spring, but you don't need to be applying stuff to the lawn 6 times a year. It really doesn't call for that. Even a good quality lawn. So, all right, what are we supposed to be doing right now? What are people doing right now? Anybody started on their lawn? Got anything done yet? Nothing. Okay, well, good. Well, we obviously didn't start too early then. Okay. What's the big buzzword in the spring? The spring cleanup. Everybody knows about the cleanup. The signs all over town, spring cleanup. What is the spring cleanup? Right. And how do you do it? How do you get it done? Good. I'm glad you said rake. There's a local company, and I won't mention them. They do all their spring cleanups with blowers. 6 guys jump out of the truck, and they're running around the yard, and stuff's flying all over the place. And the leaves all go in the woods, and then this is not a spring cleanup. If they don't bring a rake to your property when they're doing a spring cleanup, then they're not doing a spring. Spring cleanup is actually a thorough raking of the lawn. And what are we doing? We're trying to pull out some of the thatchy stuff. I don't know if you can see in this lawn, but sort of that brown, dead stuff that's in it. So when we're in there raking, we're pulling up and actually sort of stimulating the lawn. So we're pulling out some of the thatchy stuff, certainly getting the leaves and that kind of thing up. But the most important thing is that we're literally caressing the lawn. We're actually stimulating the lawn by raking it. And anyone who's done this properly, when you rake that lawn and then you get off and look at it, you go like, wow, that really looks good. And why does it live there? Because you've been pulling out a lot of this dead and dying stuff. You're getting any of this decaying debris out of there. And you're really setting up conditions for good growth. So raking is an important part of the spring cleanup. And getting all the tree branches down. I don't know if you live in Hopkinton. That's been an all-winter project, I think, for most people. We've had some very strange weather. All right, so once you get the cleanup done, then we go into, we mentioned this before, evaluating the problem areas. Big decision in the spring is, does this lawn need to be renovated? Does it need to be overseeded? Does it need to be reseeded? Does it just need to be fertilized? Because what we want to do is get a handle on what is the condition of the lawn, and so what's the next step? Can I accomplish what I need to do with just fertilization? Do I need pre-emergent crabgrass because there's massive dead areas where there isn't any grass growing? Any lawn that's out in full sun where you don't have a good density to the turf, and this has pretty good density, you're going to have crabgrass. Crabgrass is an annual grass. You're probably familiar with it. It goes along with goosegrass is another one. And they germinate from seed. And this is where we get to the soil temperature thing. We get temperature in the high 50s, Crabgrass seeds will germinate in any spot whether you have an opening in the lawn. And so how do I know if I had crabgrass? Dead crabgrass is about as easy as, you can identify that as easy as you can your own children. It has that, it's that sort of splayed out, tan colored, and there tends to be a lot of it if you had crabgrass problems. You see a lot of that in the lawn right now, and in the area where the crabgrass was, there's a dead spot. You're going to have crabgrass there again, unless you do a pre-emergent. So if the dead areas are something that size, can I put down a pre-emergent and fertilize and the lawn will fill in? Yes. If I have dead areas this size, do I need to seed? Probably. So that's the kind of decision you want to make, because the direction you go into will depend on whether you're trying to prevent crabgrass, trying to encourage growth, find out what you need to do to thicken up the lawn. Yeah.
Can you put that pre-emergent down and still be able to seed?
Yes, and I'll get to that right now. There are a number of different pre-emergents. Most of the pre-emergents there's a chemical now called Dimension that's used. It's a great pre-emergent. It's designed for use on established lawns only. In other words, where you're not seeding. It actually works well because it'll actually prevent crabgrass before it emerges and then up to what they call the 3-leaf stage, which is, so the crabgrass is already up and you still can kill it with this product. So that's a huge improvement in crabgrass prevention because it gives you more of a window to get this product down. If you want to do any seeding, you'll need to use a pre-emergent that has an appropriate herbicide. And the old one used to be called 2%, which isn't a lot of. Jonathan Green uses 2%. And Scott's uses I don't know if we brought it over. No, we didn't bring it over. It's a chemical called mesotrione, and it's right on the label. And when you're looking for the right product, it'll always say on the bag, for new seeding. It'll say crabgrass preventer for new seeding. You don't want to mix those up, because if you go through all this work and prepare the area and get the seed down and water it, and then use the wrong pre-emergent, which prevents crabgrass, it also prevents good grass. So when in doubt, always have somebody take you right to the bag to give you the right bag. So, I'm seeding a new area, I need crabgrass prevention. And people will ask, do I need to use a crabgrass preventer on a new lawn? If you have if you have dirt, you go in the backyard and you've raked it up and leveled it and and you got the seed down, if you don't put some kind of pre-emergent in an open, sunny area, you'll have nothing. It'll come up beautifully, and in 3 weeks, look how thick it is. It's getting real nice and thick. That process of preparing the lawn for seeding tends to kick up thousands and thousands of crabgrass seeds, brings them up to the surface and puts them up in the seed bed. So if you don't use pre-emergent when you're seeding bare ground, you will have no lawn by July. I can almost guarantee it. Well, you'll have a crabgrass lawn. Because the crabgrass, what's the joy of crabgrass? Crabgrass starts slow, so it looks like your good grass is doing real well. As soon as it starts getting warm, your grass starts to slow down, then it starts getting hot, and as we all know, cool season grasses in July pretty much stop. You're not getting good growth. Crabgrass is a warm season annual, which means the hotter it gets, the more vigorous it becomes. So it can go from a little clump to a whoop like this, in 3 days. So, and all of a sudden the lawn that lawn is changing color. And we don't normally figure this out until we get into July. And then all of a sudden you realize you made a mistake. So using pre-emergent is critical if you're going to. Now, if you're seeding in the shade or in part shade, you probably can get away with not using crabgrass preventer, because crabgrass likes to be out in the open sun. I would probably use it in most areas other than deep shade. You'd want to use a preventive herbicide to prevent crabgrass coming and ruining this beautiful lawn. The other mistake we make in new seeding usually is not following the directions, using too much seed. Because people, it says 2.5 pounds, I better make it 6, which is fine, but it's only fine for about 2 weeks. When the grass comes up, and if anyone's had this experience, the grass comes up looking like a chia pet. It is so dense, the grass comes up where the grass is literally fighting to find a spot. Wow, look how thick my lawn is. Wait till the neighbors see this. In reality, a newly seeded lawn when it comes up is supposed to look like a bad hair transplant. There are, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. This is a community of seedlings. They grow, they develop, they need space. So when you double up the seed rate and the seed comes up much too thick, it's fine until we start getting a little wet weather and we start getting a little humidity. And my old friend Pythium starts to show up, which most people know as damping off disease, so you picture this grass jammed together, it can't dry out, it's fighting for space, it's not a normal growing condition. And they decide, well, I'm out of here. So one by one, they start to damp off right at the base. And you wind up with, sometimes some of it will survive, but usually the entire area will just die. It's a fungal disease that will just cause everything to die right at the soil surface. So be sure that you seed at the appropriate rate so the grass has room to grow. Yes?
Is there an organic ryegrass preventer?
For seeding or just in general?
Just in general?
Yes, there is. And you've probably heard of it. It's called corn gluten. And you also can use it in garden beds as a weed preventer. The problem with corn gluten is that it works really well on lawns that don't have crabgrass or don't have a major crabgrass problem. It's very difficult to get grass control in a lawn using corn gluten, particularly in year 1. So they've actually shown that if you are persistent and you stick with corn gluten for 3 seasons, you can start getting the same kind of control that you would get using a synthetic Preemergent. But it's very poor in the initial stage. I think it has something to do with the buildup of the material in the soil until it reaches a critical level, and then it'll do a decent job. So if you had a lawn that had a lot of crabgrass last year, and you want to transition into an organic program, you don't want to use the synthetic Preemergent in year 1. Fertilize the lawn, get it to thicken up. Once the lawn starts to get thick enough that it is a competitive thing now with the crabgrass, you could transition into an organic control like corn gluten. But I definitely wouldn't use it if you have a poor quality lawn because of crabgrass. It's part of what we preach here, which is there really isn't a synthetic program, there really isn't an organic. There's a nice blending of the two if you want a good quality lawn, because there are some issues that you just can't solve using organic products. Some of the weed problems are very difficult to control using organics. So then you make the decision, well, I can live with that kind of weed. I can live with violets. I can live with, there's certain weeds that I just can't get rid of unless I'm willing to do a synthetic. I look at the synthetic end of particularly the herbicides and the insecticides. They're problem solvers, and you only pull this, you pull this out of your holster only when you need it. You don't use it. Now, and if you need to get something under control before you can transition into an organic program, then I would encourage you to probably deal with it that way. Or just accept the fact that you won't be able to solve that problem organically. So, if you can't tell whether you have crabgrass and you want to do, if you haven't really had a serious problem with it, yeah, I would definitely go to corn gluten because it's effective. It just requires it's almost like an inoculation period that you need, in the lawn to get enough of that into the lawn. And same thing in beds, because people say the same things. They might use, the old preen, the Treflan. They've been using it for years, and then, oh, here's a corn gluten. That sounds better. And they just don't get as good weed control in the first year. Then the next year, oh, it's better. It's suppressing the weeds. So, okay. All right. So a lot of stuff. Making the decisions about seeding versus just fertilizing. Do you need to use Preemergent? That's a big question in the spring. You should probably figure that out this afternoon so you can get a plan in mind. Checking the soil chemistry, which we talked about, checking particularly pH. Now, why is pH so critical? Because people always say, oh, pH, who cares? Is it acidic? When we apply fertilizers to lawns, there's a process, there's a chemistry in the soil where certain elements, we have the major elements, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then we have the minor supporting, and then we have these trace elements. All of them are important. When we have a particularly low pH in our soil, what they've discovered is that even though we're fertilizing, we're not able to improve the quality of the lawn because the nutrients that we're applying are not being absorbed by the roots. And they actually get bound up, they get tied up in the soil because of low pH. Typically, that's not nitrogen, but it's things like phosphorus and potash and those kinds of things. If you have a low pH, particularly if you've been paying attention to your lawn and trying to improve the quality of it, and you're not getting anywhere, I can almost guarantee you you're going to find your pH is off the scale on the low side. So pH is more important than fertilizer. So today you're thinking, gee, I don't have a very good lawn. I'll just get some fertilizer. But I would, because lime is cheaper than fertilizer. And it's critical because fertilizer without the proper pH is a waste of money. because you get some benefit. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but what they found is that it falls off dramatically as you go down. When you're at a 5 pH, you might get 60%, and then when you get down to a 4 pH, maybe 40% of the rest of it is just leaching through. The roots aren't able to take that up. So you want to check pH. Yes?
On the lime, are there different types of lime?
Well, it comes in different formulations, and there's a relatively new product out.
Some of them have different, I don't know, types of names, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it's granulated or
Right.
powdered.
Yeah, lime is that's a whole story too.
Some work faster than others.
Absolutely. This is the one they call Magical. I always like pulling this one out. Everything in lawn care is magic, right? Well, Magical is lime. It's the equivalent of what people used to call quicklime. They've made a product where instead of coming to a garden center and telling somebody, well, I have a quarter acre of lawn, and the guy says, well, you need 11 bags of that limestone, which is typically granular limestone. In the old days, it used to be powdered lime. If you remember you'd go out and you'd come home looking like the snowman. You say, yeah, you want to get rid of that. But so now it comes, either encapsulated or granulated, so you don't get the dust. But it's still basically the same old lime product. And the application rate was 40 to 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So that was the equivalent of 1 bag for every 1,000 square feet. If you had a half acre of lawn, that's 21,000 square feet. You need 21 bags of lime in the back of the Fiat. But so there was always this volume issue. And so the same guy that always came in and asked for 2 bags of fertilizer would always ask for 2 bags of lime. Now, nobody in the world is going to get any benefit out of 2 bags of lime, of the old traditional limes, because you're not changing pH. pH is very difficult. It has they call it buffering capacity, which means you can change pH, but then because the soil is so difficult to move the needle on pH that you kind of got to, and then it bounces back, and then it bounces back. So when people talk to you about liming, if you need liming, if you test your soil and you have a low pH, they don't talk about liming. They talk about a liming program. In other words, you have to get on to something that's repetitive. Normally twice a year if your pH is low, at least once a year if you're just on a maintenance level. And voila, we've come up with something that doesn't require a Mack truck to take it home to spread it. And a lot of the landscapers are using this now. It's a product. It's basically, if you think of it as concentrated lime. So instead of this 1 bag doing 1,000 feet, this 1 bag does 5,000 square feet. And you say, well, how do they do that? Well, obviously, the volume isn't there. The main thing with lime, the way you get it to react quicker is actually to screen it down to a very fine dust, to something that breaks down quicker in the soil. So it's like a percentage in a pesticide. This has got 10%, 2,4-D. This one's got 40%. Well, so they've created a product that basically has shrunk down the need for the amount of volume you need to spread lime. So that you can come in, if you have 10,000 square feet, you can get 2 bags of lime and treat it. And you've done the same thing as taking home 10 or 11 bags of lime. So it's caught on. Most of the professional guys use that product now because it's a labor thing, having guys hauling around all this stuff on the trucks all day. So, and it actually works. I was quite a skeptic when I first heard of this, but yes, sir.
A couple of questions. One, can you seed and feed at the same time? And also, could you talk about widespread ant hills?
Okay. Yeah, no, most of these processes can be done at the same time. When we're seeding, lots of times in the spring, we will use what's called a starter fertilizer, which is one that contains phosphorus in it. If people have noticed, I don't know, most people haven't picked up on this yet, but when we look at a bag of fertilizer now, where we used to see 3 numbers, now we only see 2, because the phosphorus has been taken out of basically all the maintenance fertilizers on the market. And that has to do with runoff and algae bloom in ponds, and to prevent the environmental consequences of applying too much phosphorus, which then runs off down the drain and this kind of thing. So unless you're seeding, you actually can't apply phosphorus. Some states have laws about it now, and you can only use starter fertilizer at certain times of the year. If you're going to do some seeding, and you could test your soil, if your phosphorus levels are low, you want to use a starter fertilizer. To answer the gentleman's question, the seeding and the fertilizing can occur on the same day. If you're using a pre-emergent in seeding, we usually recommend that you do that last. So you prepare the soil, put down the seed, lime if you want to. We put the pre-emergent and again, this is the one that's compatible with seeding only. We put that down as the last step, and the reason we do that is that it has to be applied in a perfect, calibrated, you can't make any mistakes in the last step, and you can't go back once you've put it down, which means that you can't go, oh, there's a low spot. I'm going to start raking here and level that off, and I'm going to tamp on it. And once you put the pre-emergent down, it needs to be watered in, and it needs to basically form sort of a cohesive mat in the soil, and that's what prevents crabgrass from germinating. So if you put pre-emergent down and then you come back later and say, oh, I think I'll aerate it. It looks like and you start punching holes through the whole lawn. You run one of those drums across the lawn. Or even if you rake it, you're going to break up that layer. So that's the last step.
Can you repeat the order of that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The other part isn't that critical, but it's usually a good idea to do all the mechanical stuff first. If you're going to aerate, if you're going to dethatch, rake it out, top dress, we add some soil, level the thing off, so you have a perfect seed bed. It looks like a pool table out there now. What most people do then, now some fertilizers say lightly rake in the fertilizer. Some starter fertilizers say that. So if it says that, put that down and lightly rake it in. If you're going to lime can just be put down on top. The very last step will be, now I'm putting my combination fertilizer and pre-emergent. And they usually are together. So in this case, there wouldn't be, most starter fertilizers will have the pre-emergent with them. There's a light blue bag. I don't think they brought it over. But anyway, if you want to see what that looks like. But that is actually the last thing we put down. And we try to put it down maybe before a rainstorm because it's critical that any pre-emergent that you put down be watered in. It has to be pushed down into the soil by at least a ½ inch of rain. And we get a lot of complaints in the spring about crabgrass. They come in, we tell them when to put it down. We give them all the directions, make sure you put it down at the appropriate rate, blah, 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 all this. Then they leave it for 4 weeks because it doesn't rain. And we had that problem a couple springs ago where we had a dry spring. So the stuff's sitting up here. Oh, here comes the crabgrass, and then eventually it waters in. Too late, So make sure that you water in the pre-emergent material. But you can do that all on the same day. The question. Let me just address this ant thing. I don't want to, because I'll forget. So anthills in the lawn, is that new? Or is that a summer?
Always been there.
Always been there.
Well, every year.
Yeah. Do ants damage the lawn? Do they eat the grass? No. Do they cause other problems? Yes. Typically, when you start seeing those little mounds, the biggest problem you're having is all the subterranean tunneling. And when you start getting that, of course, you're creating dry area from the bottom up, which tends to kill roots. So it's usually a good idea to get ants out of the equation. And the easiest way to do that is with a granular product like that. It contains permethrin, which is a fairly safe synthetic to put down. And it's the same thing. You have to water it in lightly, just enough to get it incorporated into the top zone. And that should be the end of the ant problem. Typically, moles are meat eaters, which means they're going after things like grubs, earthworms, some good things in the soil, some bad things in the soil. The way we typically deal with them are with repellents or with baits. And the way to go after them, and I'll get back to your question in just a second. First thing you'd want to do is you go out in the afternoon and there's traces all over the place, tunnels everywhere. We go out and we actually flatten down all the tunnels in the yard. You can get a roller or you can just walk around and tamp everything down. And all night, these guys are up all night repairing what you did. The reason that we want to reassess what's going on is that although you might have 10,000 tunnels, you only have 3 or 4 that they're actually using at any given time. You want to find out where they are. So the next morning, oh, look at this. Here they are. The tunnels are all back. If you're going to use a bait, we want to find out where they're moving so that we can insert the bait into the tunnel area so they'll pick it up. It'll kill them. So do that first. The other option is to push the moles out of your yard. Now, this is a little controversial because lots of times it means pushing it into your neighbor's yard. But you can push moles into wooded buffer areas. People always say, well, I got a lot of woods in the back. Why don't they go there? Well, they will if you force them to go there. These products contain castor oil, so they're very, that's infused. Don't use that. Here we go, this stuff. And you can buy this as a granular. Actually, here's a And the way we put it down, it's very important that you follow the instructions, because if we apply this the wrong way or we just run around and throw it everywhere, you'll have moles forever. The way this product works is it's almost like herding cats. If your house is here and you've got a little mole activity over here but nothing over here, what we do is we start creating bands of this material that we water into the soil close to the house. So you're between, here's the woods, make sure I'm explaining this right. Here's the woods, here's the lawn, here's your house. They're only in this side yard, say, okay? So we go out with our product and we put a couple of bands just inside the damaged area close to the house. Once that stuff's in the soil, they won't want to go into that area. They start moving this way. Then you go out the next day and you build another couple of bands and you water those in. And what you're really doing is pushing these problems off the lawn area, because they don't want to be in the castor oil. If you put problems here and you go out and you encircle them with the castor oil, they won't leave. You will never be able to get them. They'll huddle in there and wait until it biodegrades. So you want to make sure you have that. You always want to have that escape alley so you can push them away from the lawn area. Yes. Yeah, using a bait is, you have to be very careful. I mean, that's an iron phosphide. It's a poisonous bait. So you want to make sure that that stuff is in the tray, down in the hole, not up at the surface where anybody else can get at it, and definitely not where your dog or a cat can get at it. That kind of thing. You might be interested in it. So you want to make sure that it's. Yeah, you find that active hole, and sometimes you go. I think that's why they see this little pointy thing. You actually put that, and you kind of can open up the hole, and you put the bait down in there, and then you can kind of close it up. And then they'll be, oh, look at this. Somebody brought dinner in for me. And then they carry that stuff back and they feed it to the rest of the clan. And now the thing with moles is you don't have a lot of them. People always say, oh, they must be like mice. There's thousands of them. Look at all these. You can have 1 or 2 moles and they can devastate a 1/4 acre lot with this, because they're very busy. They're busy little guys. So they'll create a lot of this tunneling over, and it'll give the impression that you have a community. So you really only have to eliminate a few of them.
What if the thatch is real thick? Can they still? Do they like dirt?
They like dirt, yeah. So, well, maybe a preventative is just let your thatch get thick, and they want. That's not a bad idea, but anyway, did I answer your question on? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you just want to be careful the way you use it. There actually is a third option. I don't know if you've ever seen the guillotine. It's a tool that it has a sort of a metal frame, and it has what look like 6 or 7 dinner forks inside this little chamber. And you put this over an active run, and you lift up the guillotine, and there's a plate. When they go through the soil, they hit the plate, and the thing comes down and skewers them. But then, obviously, it's like finding the dead rat in the trap. What do you do? Yeah. Yes, sir.
The organic question on ants, I did discover they don't like borax, but does that destroy the lawn with long-term use?
Probably like boric acid. Yeah. The same stuff we use like roach control. And I'd probably use diatomaceous. If you want to go in an organic route, there's a product called diatomaceous earth. I've heard of that. And supposedly that controls ants in a house. So you might try that as a lawn treatment. If you got a lot of rain, you'd have to reapply it. There'd be some limitations to maybe borax down the. If you get it down into the actual nests, go around one by one. But easiest thing would just put a control in a lawn spreader and water it in, and if you're not opposed to that. And did you have a question, or did I? Okay, very good. Okay, well, I think we covered most of that. A big one on the spring agenda is always don't procrastinate. This is the one that I love, because everybody thinks they've got 6 weeks in the spring. Oh, I got 7 weeks, I got 8 weeks. 4 of those weekends it's going to rain. One of them you're going to have to go to somebody's christening someplace. If you have the day to do any of this stuff, you have to do it. Make hay while the sun shines, kind of thing, because we have more people get shut out by weather. I mean, you can't apply most of these granulars in the rain, and there's just certain times you have to do things. So develop a plan real quick and try to get it done early. If you have 2 weekends, do it the first weekend. I guess it rains like tomorrow. It's going to rain all day. Yes, sir.
We're having a new lawn installed.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
And we live on a lake, so
Uh-huh.
we are restricted in terms of using fertilizer
Mhm.
and pesticides.
Right.
Do you have any particular advice or?
Are you allowed to use phosphates to seed there? You might want to check with, is it a homeowners association kind of thing, or?
We had it rooted in the deed,
Ah.
as a result of
Okay.
conversations with the Conservation Commission.
Yeah.
This is the national. It's no more specific than that, I think. It just says.
Yeah. To limit it, or, yeah.
limited,
Well, there are some advantages to organic fertilizers, if it's just the feeding aspect of it, in that they don't tend to leach. The synthetic fertilizers are pretty much what they call water soluble. There are things that they can do to them that slow down the breakdown of the nitrogen. Sometimes you'll see that some of it is good for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, this kind of thing. Organics break down slowly in the soil based on microbial action. So I would say probably going to an organic fertilizer is one thing you could do. If you're going to do a synthetic pre-emergent, I would make sure that I did it properly. Anything that needs to be watered in right away. Don't leave it up on the surface so it can be washed down the hill or tracked down the hill. Or,
Is that a place to use corn gluten?
yeah, corn gluten is pretty innocuous. I mean, you can eat corn gluten. I mean, corn gluten is it's a fertilizer, has a nitrogen component. I think they feed it to livestock, so it's not going to hurt anybody. So, yeah, if you need grass control, that would be an accommodation. You could try to go the corn gluten route. Weed controls. There are some new organic weed controls. One of them is this new product that contains iron for broad. Yeah, this is probably the best new product for organic lawns that's come along in 25 years. Because the biggest problem used to be, well, we had corn gluten for pre-emergent, but what do you do with weeds after they come up? What do I do with dandelions? What do I do with violets? I don't want to use that nasty, 2,4-D dicamba weed begone kind of products. And some of that is legitimate concern. People want to limit the use of some of those chemicals. No one was ever able to take out a broadleaf weed after it appeared in a lawn without killing the lawn. There's a product called Burnout. There it is, yeah. This was the organic broadleaf weed control post-emergent chemical. You went around the lawn. This had a citric acid in it, and you burned holes in your lawn. So you killed the weeds, and you killed everything around it. That was the organic control. And then you reseeded. And many people were willing to do that because they wanted to stay away from, this stuff. The synthetic, like sedge ender and chickweed and oxalis, that has triclopyr in it. It's so clear out the room. Actually, that's corn gluten. We could test it out, see how innocuous it is. But any of these chemical materials that, if they want to try to avoid that. Now we've got this product that uses a concentrated iron that when you spray this on a broadleaf weed, like a dandelion or clover, or even, they say even some of the hard to control weeds, the high concentration of iron will selectively kill the broadleaf without damaging the grass. So this is a huge breakthrough, because the one thing people don't like dealing with is herbicides. That I've discovered because of all the horror stories, and there are a lot of them. So look into this product. The only downside to this is wherever you use it, instead of burning a hole, you actually create a green oasis because you're adding iron. Iron is a natural component of chlorophyll. It enhances the green. So you wind up with some greener spots, which fade. It's not a permanent thing, but some people are concerned about that. Yeah.
Next to that, you had the second back says Weed Beater Ultra.
Yep.
What's the difference?
Well, this is a synthetic product that works really, really well. It's got some huge advantages. One of them is you can use it when the weather is cold in the spring. The normal thing on synthetic, or rather any organic weed control, the weeds have to be actively growing and temperatures typically have to be above 60 degrees for that to happen. You can go out in the spring and treat the early emerging, they're almost a winter annual type weed, with a product like this at 40 degrees and you can get kill. So that's pretty amazing. The other thing is you can reseed a lawn 2 weeks after you use this, which you can't with most herbicides. one thing in the back of your mind, just always remember, if I'm doing any kind of weed control, whether it's pre-emergent or post-emergent, be sure you understand how that plays into seeding a lawn, any kind of other process on the lawn. If you're going to use an herbicide, does it affect it? Okay, so you want to keep that. This stuff you can, for instance, if you put down a typical pre-emergent, you can't go back in 2 weeks and reseed that. Typically, you're going to have to wait, 4 to 6 weeks on some of the herbicides require a 6-week wait. Some of them you have to wait till fall to seed. So this gives the ability to knock the weeds out of the lawn and then seed it 2 weeks, which means you can do this in the cool weather and then come back and get the lawn going in a timely fashion. You do this in late April, second week of May, perfect time to seed. Boom, and you can get the new lawn in the spring. So.
What was the last product called? The iron product?
Yeah, it's just called Weed Beater plus iron. Or it just has that Fe on it, the chemical symbol for iron. Weed Beater. All right. Derived from iron, which occurs in nature. I love the way they put that in. Yeah. So one thing I should point out about these bonide chemicals, because lots of people are confused. Is it synthetic? Is it organic? This is a very consumer-friendly company. They actually banned all of their products. The product has this tan band in this corner, as opposed to purple or the red one for the. Well, anyway. This means that the product is organic. You don't have to know the active ingredient in it. So you know that tan is an organic code word for them. Yeah. And some of they have a different banner for Bonide. It's a chemical. It's like Ortho. Bonide is huge in lawn care now. It's one of the biggest companies. So in most, and you'll find them in box stores and everywhere. But we carry Bonide here, and we don't do much with Ortho. We pretty much have discontinued their line. But so Bonide is our equivalent, and pretty much any product that one company makes that's in the lawn care business, guess what? Somebody else is making it too. They're all on it. So, okay. Whoa. All right. Okay. So a couple of these, we covered some of these spring seeding guidelines. We'll just maybe wrap it up with this. Challenge, of course, is to get the lawn going early enough so that you can get it established before the heat of summer kicks in, which means cold, wet springs like we're having are not our friend. So we need to get some soil temperatures up so we can get some seeding going so that we can build a root system before the stress of summer comes along. So the question, people always say, well, gee, I can get out of my lawn, I can do the raking, should I seed now? Well, it's going to be 35 degrees tomorrow, and it's going to be 40 on Monday. Is that a problem? No, no. If you have a nice day like this, if you go out and prep, get your seed down, put your pre-emergent down, which we're almost in that window when this would be a good time to do that. Seed will sit for a long time in cool, wet soils. In the old days before they treated seed, if you put seed down and the soil stayed wet for 3 weeks, it would rot. But seed now is you're able to get the seed down, get it pressed into the soil, put down whatever you need, ride out the next week, which is going to be cold, or the next 2 weeks. But as soon as those soil temperatures, we get up into the 60-degree days, the sun comes out, soil temperatures push up, everything's in place, the seed will germinate. So that's how you solve the problem of, gee, I said don't procrastinate. Well, when you strike when the iron's hot and get the seed down. So I would say if anyone has seeding plans, do it now. Sir?
Yeah, my lawn's brand new. It was put in August, September of last year.
Yep.
Is there a course of action I should lean towards this spring?
Was a seed lawn or a sod?
Yeah, a seeded lawn, yeah.
Yeah. How did it winter? Did it fill in nicely? Or is it still thin?
It's still thin.
Good, and that's normal. And again, I would say that you come into a garden center and I'll take some of that sod, and they roll out this stuff that looks like a plush carpet, right? It's like, well, that's 3 years. I got a little jump on you doing your little seeding. So fall seeding in the spring, again, it's not going to look like a finished product. It should be thin. You ought to be able to seed soil. So what does that mean? That means you have a prime opening for grass problems. So you want to get a pre-emergent chemical down. That would be the most important. If you do nothing else this spring, and it will need to be fertilized too, because whatever they put down in the fall is long gone, and there's going to be a nutritional issue. You're going to start noticing the lawn is getting a little yellow maybe prior to fertilization. So you want to make sure you fertilize. Yes, sir.
What you discussed is a lot of work. Is there a organic clean lawn paint?
Hey, don't laugh. I used to live down in Maryland, and down there, everybody's big on zoysia lawns. You've heard of zoysia as a grass? And some people even tried Bermuda down there. And well, those are warm season lawns, which means they look good when the temperatures are 80 degrees, 75, 80 degrees. As soon as you get a frost, what happens? They turn pink, and then they turn brown. So they had companies down there that would put a latex green paint on your lawn right after the first frost. And it was a little jarring, I have to admit, but down there, lawns stay greener. You know, up here we have our normal dormancy. You have a bad winter and no snow cover, what does the lawn look like? Death, right? Well, down in the Mid-Atlantic states, that color persists. So having somebody with a painted lawn in the winter next to, you know, up here, if you painted your lawn in the winter, they'd probably, you know, send somebody around to pick you up and, you know, put you in the nut house or something. You know, it's like, what is this guy doing? He's painting his lawn, you know. But the answer is yes, sir. You can paint your lawn with, and it doesn't damage the lawn. It doesn't, you know. Now, I wouldn't paint it in active growth, though. In other words, right now, when your lawn's greening up, oh, I don't like how green it is. I want it really green. You know, that would interfere with normal, you know, growth and photosynthesis and things. But never had that question. It's a very good question. Yes, ma'am.
So if I'm planning to have good quality soil delivered, and
Yeah.
can I just put it on top of the lawn that doesn't look so great and start the seeding?
Yeah. That's.
Or do I need to rototill or dethatch first and then put in the soil? Or
Yeah, that's usually part of the assessment process where we're trying to figure out, do I have anything here worth saving? You know, when we look out on the lawn, you know, if it's really patchy and this kind of thing, you know, normally if you have a halfway decent lawn, you want to improve it, and you want to improve the rate of seeding germination, we do this process called top dressing, which you've heard of, where you put half an inch or 3/4 of an inch of soil and spread it over the whole lawn. And when you're done, you can see the soil, but also you can see all the green, so, you know, kind of pushing up through it. And that soil kind of works its way down into the thatch layer. And actually, it does a good job of breaking down thatch, because the soil, of course, contains microbes. So I mean, that's one way sometimes we work with thatch. You know, how do you get rid of thatch? Introduce something that helps break it down. So top dressing is always a good kind of thing. If the lawn is really in poor condition, then you'd want to assess, you know, is it bad because I have a thatch problem, a major thatch problem, like this lawn. So this lawn is, you know, due to be dethatched. In that case, since you're not trying to save anything, the best thing to do would probably get a sod cutter and cut all of the thatch off. And it would roll up just like a brown rug. And in other words, to get right down to the soil level, then add your good soil.
So part of it has sod, and the sod's not doing well. We should take that up first.
Not doing well in the sense of dead, not doing well, or?
It's slowed down. It's too shady.
Yeah.
So, but it's
Yeah,
for a client, and she just wants new grass. So
Yeah.
you have to determine what's going to.
I would probably take that sod up because it probably is not a shade-tolerant sod. And you'll have to seed that area, you know, with a dense shade type seed. But yeah, sod is a little like a thatch problem. If you ever picked up a piece of sod, it feels like you're carrying around rug, and that's what it is. It's a thatchy layer with green stuff and a little bit of root at the bottom. So when you're sodding, what you're doing is laying down that little bitty root and then encouraging it to root in and continue. So if you didn't have a big thatch problem, and you know, it was just sort of intermittent a little, and you didn't have any, you know, noxious weed problems. You don't have any kind of weeds that you know, oh, well, I know that's going to come back, so I better deal with that. You could just lay that soil right over the top and seed, because that, you know, if there's a little bit of thatch, that soil will actually break down the thatch and create some good organic matter, and so it's.
You still have to do that
The pre-emergent,
yeah.
when you seed, if it's in deep shade, you might be able to avoid it. But if it's out in a sunny area, I would use pre-emergent, because that's where your crabgrass is. If you're introducing soil, that's a great lead-in to the, you know, when you buy good quality soil, you know, we sell a really good high organic loam, which is great for top dressing lawns and lawn repair, that kind of thing. We get a lot of calls from people 5 weeks after they put it down, and they start telling us that there are weeds coming up in the soil. If weeds didn't come up in your soil after it was delivered, I'd be very scared. You know, it would have meant that it was either chemically treated or heat treated. Something would have, you know, there was something in the soil that prevents regrowth. You know, it's like if you get the big 8 yards delivered in the driveway and you know, and it sits there for 6 months and nothing grows in it, you know. So you would expect, Yeah, you would expect, weed seeds to be there. And so if it's in an area where crabgrass, including crabgrass seeds, so if it's an area that would promote that, then yeah, I would put a pre-emergent. So.
Do a small spot area of thatch with just topsoil, or does it have to be?
If it's a good quality loam, I mean, everybody knows we've all gotten bad loam and we've gotten good loam, and bad loam is the stuff that they deliver, and the next day when you go out to put it in the wheelbarrow, you can't dig into it because it's like a cone of cement. So that in other words, it's void of organic matter, and
But you just use topsoil for a small area?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people will get soil and they'll amend it a little. You can do your own mix. Even if you got, say, you knew somebody who had some not so good soil. There's nothing wrong with it, but it was, it was heavy, or it just didn't have good organic content. You can get compost and stuff and mix up your own good top dressing right in your driveway.
Can you say again what the sequences with a pre-emergent, fertilized seed, etc.?
Yeah, the pre-emergent is the last step. Everything else, you can do whatever. It's a whim. You can do whatever you want for the rest of it. But you don't want to disturb the pre-emergent once you put it down. Because the only thing that's between you and crabgrass is that very thin layer. And all it takes is somebody sneezing. And the other thing is kids playing on the lawn. I mean, this is another one. Until you water that in, if they played football on your lawn, give it up. Because it'll actually come up in footprints. You'll actually see, there was a guy, and he's come to some of my seminars. He asked me to come look at his lawn. I went over there, and he thought he had done everything right. He put the pre-emergent, the right pre-emergent, everything, and the lawn had kind of filled in. And when the thing came up, it looked like a checkerboard, a big, big checkerboard where he had good grass. And about this far apart, everywhere I looked, there was a column of light green stuff coming up in the lawn. Well, the guy had taken a drum aerator out on the lawn after he'd put the pre-emergent down and made a perfect pattern of perforated holes. You know how those things work. They punch holes in the grass. So everywhere he punched down through the layer, the crabgrass found that little column to open up. So it was almost like he had this. It was actually sort of interesting, but it wasn't going to be later on because that crabgrass had gotten a foothold in this little area where good grass, crabgrass, good grass, crabgrass. So that was a hard lesson to learn. Don't mess with the pre-emergent, once it's down. So, yes.
Well, if you're going to dethatch it, should you aerate as well? And what's an aerator going to do if you've already thatched it?
Well, those are two different processes. So the dethatching is the surface spongy stuff, which sounds like you know what that is, and the aerating is the soil compaction problem. So we're really dealing with two different problems. Now, if you do a proper aeration, sometimes you do get some good effect on dethatching because these tines will actually rip some thatch out as you're going through the process. But in general, if your soil is hard and compact, you need an aerator. And when we go to rent the aerator, we always want to make sure that we tell the person we want a core removal aerator. It's the one that has the hollow tines. It's not the neighbor who has the drum with the nails sticking out of it riding around the neighborhood. I always tell people, you think in terms of there's a volume of soil, and you take your fingers and you jam it down into the soil and you pull them out. Now, is that soil in there less or more compacted after I've done, forcing it to the left and right? What you want to do is reach down, pull out that column of soil, pull it up to the surface. And then it's almost like this, I can relax. The soil then literally physically can relax because it has somewhere to go. So you want to make sure that you're actually pulling plugs. When you're done doing it right, your lawn looks, I always say it looks like the Canada geese had just landed on your lawn. And that if you see it on golf courses a lot. And you get a lot of complaints on golf. I used to work on a golf course, and people, the number one complaint was aerating the fairways. Because the ball would hit, I hate to say it, but weekend golfers aren't very good. They love to blame the staff for everything that goes wrong. And when their ball bounces the wrong way, they always blame it on the little cores that we left all over the surface of the soil. So that's what it's supposed to look like. If you don't see soil cores on the surface, and the same thing, if you're going to hire somebody, you ask that question. Are you going to spike my lawn, or are you going to aerate my lawn? You don't want your lawn spiked. That's particularly if you're paying them to do it,
So we're putting a couple inches of the new soil on top. Should I still crap underneath it if it's really compact?
If it's really, if that lawn, if one of the reasons it failed was compaction, in other words, it feels like this floor, it feels like a piece of bluestone you're walking on. Yeah, aerating prior to putting sure. I mean, you could try to aerate after, but it's very difficult because when you have loose soil, it doesn't plug well. So you want, and the other thing is when you rent the aerator, Make sure that your soil is not bone dry, because when you run an aerator over a bone dry, you break off the tines. And when you take it back to the rental place, they're going to charge you $5 a piece to repair all the broken tines. So in other words, it has to, it can't be like this. Those tines have to go into the soil and come out again. So it has to be like it is right now. This would be a great time to aerate right now, because you can get good plugs. You can get 4 or 5 inch plugs and pull them right out of the soil. So. And they say that's all the time we have. I think. No, it's not like an exit. Any other questions? There's some stuff we didn't cover. So if you have, it's quite a bit we didn't cover. But do you have any questions on, organic products or anything like that? Please.
How often do you use generally with thatch or aerating?
Well, thatching depends on the level of maintenance. Again, if you're doing things that promote thatch and you don't have good soil microbes, you might need to dethatch every other year, because it'll build up very rapidly. Those microbes, we don't think about those poor guys. I mean, they're working overtime down there, breaking down that, the thatch layer from below. So if you're under a reasonable amount of fertilizing, you don't use a lot of pesticides, you may not have to mechanically dethatch ever. Once you get that lawn. Yeah, dethatching is like a birthright, or, it's not something that you're going to have to do. It's when, as a matter of fact, it's one of those tip-offs in lawn care that you're doing something wrong. If you're getting thatch buildup all the time, there's something in the program and it's usually too much fertilizer. You're really putting down too much. You're pushing too much growth, that kind of thing. So, and as far as aerating is, we usually think about aerating when we notice that the quality of the lawn is poor and nothing, and again, it's sort of like the pH thing. When I'm trying to do everything right, but when I pull that plug of soil out to do my analysis in the spring, I've got 1.5 inches of root, and it doesn't matter if I fertilize or don't, nothing seems to be happening. When you have that kind of compaction where you're basically dealing with cement, roots can penetrate, but they can't penetrate, if you have a clay layer down there.
So it's not a regular schedule of doing it?
No, it's a problem-solving mechanism, and shallow rooting is a big tip-off that you're not getting good, that the soil is just too dense. The roots go down, the roots go sideways, and they can't get into the lower soil profile. So, okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and hope it solved the problem for you.
I hope you learned a lot today. I know I did. And thanks to John Moretti for his spring lawn care seminar. Remember, make your life bloom. This is Deb Moore for HCAT TV. How does your garden grow?